Oh, that is so clutch. Or is that so? I'm not even sure anymore. Alright guys, Dustin here, back from DG's Pro Tech again. It's been a while since our last video. Today we're talking all about manual transmissions and clutch options. So, manual transmissions, a little bit of history, we always like to give you a bit. Cars and trucks, gas and diesel, have been running manual transmissions since the dawn of time. Now, in the last few decade or model years, we've been seeing a trend away from manual transmissions or to an automatic shifting style manual, which is a whole other video in itself. But today we're going to focus on manual transmissions and clutches specifically from pickup trucks because really they're the simplest we still have in the market. History, talk your big three, Ford, Dodge, Chevy for a second. There has been a trend, and currently in a Ford pickup or a GM pickup or a Dodge pickup, to the best of our knowledge, there are no manual transmission options for 2019 model year and above. Ford slowed, and I do not believe there was a manual transmission option in their half-ton up to their 5-ton trucks after 2011 model year. Same thing with Duramax and just GMs in general after 2011 model year. Dodge held on a little longer, like they do with good old technology. Dodge kept that going until the 2018 model year. Gone for 2019 is the manual transmission options. But hey, they still exist. We still work on them. They still break just like everything else. So the basis of your clutch option is what you see in front of you. What entails a clutch? Well, this is what I would call a complete clutch assembly. Now it involves three components basically, and we'll break them down. You have your pressure plate, which is actually floating and bolted to your flywheel. Okay. You have your actual clutch disc, which is the piece that gets squeezed between the flywheel and the pressure plate, and it is splined to the input shaft of the transmission. So if the input shaft of the transmission is turning, this is turning with it. And the big heavy piece here that I'm holding is your flywheel. So your crankshaft, if you can picture from your engine, bolted to your flywheel. As crankshaft turns, flywheel turns. As flywheel turns, this machine surface is moving as well. The idea is, if your engine is turning and we want to stop, we need to remove power from between the engine and transmission. That's the basis of a clutch. We disengage the power between the rotating engine assembly and what we would have as a stopped transmission assembly. Well, how do we do that? It's quite simple. The disc itself must be able to clamp and move as an assembly, or disengage and free float while the engine is still turning, okay? Basis of clutch failure are generally when the actual disc, which you can kind of see the disc on there, it is a wearable component. It is made of a friction type material that may be either phenolic, ceramic, organic, whatever the case may be, and there's pros and cons to each. And as that clutch is used up, very similar to brake pad wears off, eventually you can get a surface where this machine surface or the other machine surface of which that clutch squeezes between can get hot spot or cracking, and then you have a clutch failure. Well, what do you do when you have a clutch failure? You want to replace that clutch. The proper procedure is to replace the clutch assembly. Typically it will come with the new pressure plate assembly. There will be a bearing in the center of the flywheel that gets done usually, as well as if there is a wear with it, as well as a bearing that goes on here we call the throat bearing that allows that to ride on there. We see that wear components on the pressure plate. A couple neat things about flywheels before I drop this big heavy component. The flywheels kind of come in two options. You have what's called a single mass and a dual mass flywheel. Single mass, for basis of all comparison, solid piece of iron, cast iron or steel, bolted to the crank, maybe a ring gear. It's a heavy rotating member of the engine, and it is just a machined surface of which the clutch goes onto, and that's it. They usually can be machined a few times. If there is a clutch failure and it grinds up, it doesn't have to be replaced every time. So you will be able to buy some clutches with no flywheel, like as a kit, some clutch kits with a flywheel. Now, this one came out of the truck behind me on the hoist. This truck behind me on the hoist is a 2018 Ram with a Cummins diesel. And this specific application has what's called a dual mass flywheel. So we'll dive into the dual mass flywheels for a second here. A dual mass flywheel, basically, instead of a solid piece of steel, we have two pieces of steel or cast iron. The first piece is solidly bolted to the engine. It means that engine's turning, it's turning. There's no movement and no independent movement. But the second surface, the actual machine surface, can actually move back and forth. Now this one's broken, so it can't, but typically this would move back and forth a little bit. Well, you can see these spring-loaded areas in there. Certain vehicles, they're rubber, and big trucks, they're steel like this. So basically the idea is when the clutch comes in and engages, there's gonna be a bit of chatter. The dual mass flywheel absorbs that chatter. As a other bonus is if you get an engine, like an older engine that's quite rattly and rocking, you're gonna get a scenario in which you're gonna feel that through the engine, transmission, etc., maybe even in the driver's seat. If we have a movable component in our flywheel, we can reduce that chatter and reduce that noise, vibration, harshness. Bonus, those are all good things. Downside, if these springs or this moving, floating hub is damaged in any way, they're very expensive to replace. You know, a dual mass flywheel itself may cost $1,000 just for the flywheel. Other downside, typically they're non-machinable because to put a bit on there and try and machine that rotating piece would float and you don't get a good machine. So typically they're kind of a one and done type unit. That's why we don't like them. This customer, and in this manual transmission, this G56 transmission you see beside me, that comes out of this Cummins application, these were all dual mass flywheels. When they fail, like this customer started to make a bit of noise, we're gonna replace it in this case with a single mass flywheel upgrade. And now we'll take you under the truck here to show you a single mass flywheel. This is a good example of a brand new single mass flywheel. Notice, no clutch assembly in here. Flywheel just simply bolts right to the crankshaft, brand new pilot bearings. This is a new clutch kit going in. And then you'll have your disc that will simply just sit on there, and then your pressure plate will come in and hold that, and life is good. Now, a couple neat things to notice in this new clutch assembly because it's open to see it. Obviously, this is what new friction material looks like. Now, there are sometimes solid pieces of friction, sometimes independent pieces of friction. It really depends on your individual clutch. Also notice springs on the actual clutch hub. That is there because as the clutch engages, there's a lot of torque here, guys. We need to have a little bit of room for air. So these are actually a rubber type damper, and these are actual mechanical spring type dampeners. Now there are clutches that do not have these dampeners in here. So when that clutch engages, she's and go, and you get a bit of drag with that. The downside to not having a sprung clutch hub like this is the fact that you may get some chatter or some engagement or disengagement concerns. This allows some movement so we can get that clutch to engage and disengage nice and smooth. Now, there is an application in which you don't need that sprung hub. In the higher horsepower guys, that's where you're getting their racing clutches, and the reason they have that is because we don't want there to be any dampening. We're not so worried in a heavy duty racing application of how nice it engages. We're more worried about the fact that it engages and it's a solid engagement, okay? We'll go back out for a second here. We'll show you some other neat clutch upgrades and then we'll move forward. So, clutch representation figure 1 as per Dustin at DG's. Clutches can be a mystery for guys. If I can show it to you without you having to pull your train and go, oh, I see how that works, we've got something we can work with. Remember, if the flywheel is turning, this is all turning together and life is good. You want to make a gear change, we need to take the pressure off to allow you to pick a new gear with inside your transmission. So if you can picture this alignment tool as your input shaft, as shown here, see? Input shaft on transmission. When a clutch change needs to be made, the fork, which has a bearing, will come in and push, the bearing comes in and pushes on these forks. Now, I'm not strong enough because this takes a couple thousand pounds of hydraulic pressure behind it, and it's going to be pushing down on these fingers, as you see where they wear. Inside, those fingers will actually pivot and cause the machine surface on the inside of this to separate and pull back. You know, we're only talking, thousandths of an inch here, guys, not a whole lot of room here. And at that point now, instead of this turning as an assembly, the input shaft, notice, can turn freely. Now what happens is once you release the pressure off the fork, you've let your clutch up, which means this has come back down, this is now free floating. Now all of a sudden everything is turning together again. Next gear happens, you push the clutch in, this pushes on the forks, input shaft is now free to turn again, and we then disengage the clutch pedal, engaging the clutch, and the next gear happens. If it's too complicated, hey, give us a call at DG's. I'll walk you through this, or we'll just get it fixed up for you. So as you can see, if this clutch slips too much, we'll have a failure. If the disc is physically not big enough within its friction material, we can have a failure. If these springs wear out, the self-adjustments you see here wear out, the dual mass flywheel has a spring dampener problem. Many things can happen to a clutch that cause it to fail. Now, if there is a failure, it's a determination of, is the failure something mechanical that was not caused by use of the driver, overuse of the vehicle, under size or engineering of the actual component itself? What was the cause of failure? That's the job of the technicians at DG's to figure that out for. Now, maybe this truck is just driven aggressively, tows aggressively, it's not outside of its normal realm of use. Maybe this is a failure the customer's worried may happen again if he simply puts a stock clutch assembly back in. Maybe it's time for an upgrade. So there's many customers or many companies out there, vendors for us, that supply us with quality clutch parts that have quality warranty, and there may be 1 to 5 different stages of clutch upgrades for horsepower and torque levels that go down the list. The biggest complaint we have of customers that have clutch failures, they've got, say, an upgraded dual disc, street dual disc clutch in there that's meant to hold more, and they use it, and it fails. And then they just simply blame the clutch. Well, maybe that was the wrong clutch for the application. A little bit of knowledge goes a long way. Most of our clutch vendors are well-versed of knowledge. Don't hesitate to give them a call. Even us here at DG's ProTech, we can direct you on what we believe the right clutch kit is for your application, making sure it is within the horsepower, torque levels, and use of your needs and wants of your truck. Making sure that we get a quality clutch in here that has a good warranty. We deal with a couple clutch companies, Luke, South Bend, Valair, great companies out there, different applications, very similar steps between the horsepower levels. But again, there's a time and a place and an application for the clutch that's right for you, the customer, and we can get you there. We are also a direct dealer for most of these guys. So if you've got a clutch like this, you've upgraded to, say, a street dual disc clutch, and you need only one component, you don't know where to get that, call us at DG's. We can definitely get that from the vendor directly to you out quickly and easily. If you have a possible warranty concern, we can also help with that. That's what DG's ProTech as a shop can do for you. So clutch 101, figure 2, because I'm getting smarter, more technical in my age. This is an example of a dual disc clutch assembly. Now, why would we pick a dual disc clutch assembly for a customer? Well, in this case, it's a street dual disc, okay? Now, with anything, friction, go back to physics class from high school. Friction, the more friction we can get, the more power or torque we can put through it and actually be able to hold more. A dual disc, simply for ease, 2 discs, double the surface area, therefore some kind of double the holding power. So you still have a pressure plate. Now, just this is upside down for figure's sake. You still have a pressure plate. It has a machine surface. Then you have a clutch, 2 sides. Notice, we'll talk about that in a second, each side has a different type of friction material. Then you have what's called a separator plate. Now, a separator plate's job is to go in there and just create another machine surface for that clutch to bite on from the pressure plate side to it. And then, to top it all off, one more clutch assembly goes in there. Now we have 4 friction surfaces within the same diameter that is our limitation of the bell housing and flywheel of the transmission. So there are many applications in which just simply having double the friction will give us more holding power to transport torque through the wheels without having slipping. Downsides to this are the fact that installation becomes a little more difficult because you are lining up multiple discs with that so that the input shaft can slide. Remember, the input shaft is now going to have 2 discs riding on it, okay? Other thing you'll typically do is, remember we talked about the dual mass flywheels? I've yet to see in the marketplace a dual mass flywheel setup with a multi-disc. You can even get 3 and 4 disc setups in higher horsepower applications, but a multi-disc application with a dual mass flywheel. If somebody out there has seen one, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to see the technology behind that. But basically, we now have a floating plate in between, so you can get a bit of noise as this floating plate chatters back between. It does have an area in which it rides on within that flywheel we showed a minute ago, but you can get multi-disc applications that are still fully compatible for street use or towing or off-road use as well. They're definitely going to give you the holding horsepower you need. Now, a street dual disc 3250, which is what you see in front of us from a company called South Bend, is a very popular application. These clutches go for around $1,500 as a complete kit. Let's talk about friction material now for a second. So, in my technical knowledge, there are basically 3 types of friction material I mentioned before. You have a phenolic, you have an organic, and you have a ceramic. And then there are cross combinations between them. This is an example of a ceramic type disc. Now you notice ceramic is harder. The harder a ceramic compound, the better if it has a good surface we can get it to bite. It dissipates low heat. Very similar to a ceramic brake pad. Okay? There's pros and cons to both. On the other side here, we have a phenolic, more like a standard clutch material you'd find in a factory clutch. The advantage here, it doesn't quite have the gripping power. It is going to put out a little more dust, but it's a softer compound, which means you can get potentially a good bite, but it may wear out faster. On one side or the other, you're going to get less clutch chatter by having a little bit of different materials on each side of this disc. Now, there are dual disc clutch and triple disc clutch that are full on ceramic all the way around with no sprung hub. That's your high horsepower, not so much street applications. Your basic clutch from factory typically has an organic or phenolic on each side. There's also organic in there. I won't get into that because that's a bit of a choice depending on what you want to use with organic for. Organic's usually a little less horsepower, but a little better driving characteristics as well. So you may have phenolic, organic, ceramic, and there are cross-compound materials as well in these clutches for the engagement that you need. And again, that's a question you're going to talk to us or the vendors on what the correct clutch application with the correct material in your clutch disc that's right for you. So I think we've touched on everything clutch-wise. The only thing I want to touch on too, guys, I'll take you back over the transmission, is if you choose to go to a performance clutch application, one of the biggest problems we have with customers is which they've bought partial kits. You can buy a lot of these kits from Belair, South Bend, let's say they're a dual upgrade, that may or may not come with a flywheel, may or may not come with hydraulics, because again, as we're putting spring pressures in that pressure plate that also change for better clutch holding force, you know, a lot of guys will say, well, rather than a dual disc, I'll just go with a big single that has more clamping force. And that's definitely an option in them as well. The numbers in those kits will tell us the clamping force. Clamping force may increase the amount of force you need on your pedal to push that pedal in, which can get frustrating as well. And then most of these kits also, so your hydraulics come in from the far side to make your fork ride back and forth. Remember to squeeze that pressure plate to make that clutch disengage. Having an upgraded set of hydraulics in your clutch kit may be necessary, may be optional, but recommended. So that also will obviously change your clutch kit as well. And we have clutch kits with or without hydraulics. Certain clutch kits, you don't get an option. You must use their hydraulics because of the spring force we're dealing with. But in a kit like this, it's very complete. Last thing we'll touch on here in our talk all about clutches is the actual pressure plate. Remember, the bearing comes down, turning, and pushes on these forks, and these are actual springs that will actually move and release the actual, give you some room in there for that clutch to move. These springs come in different clamp load forces. So just to complicate it one more step, we can have multi-discs, we can have single discs, we can have different diameter discs. We can also have different clamp load force. The amount of clamp load we can squeeze that clutch under, hypothetically speaking, we can hold more torque through that actual clutch assembly. So it begs then the question is, when we release a clutch, it can be a combination of a pedal and mechanical system, or typically in today's clutches and manual transmissions, you're going to see a hydraulic assembly like this. So I'll take you over to the transmission here. So what you see in front of me then is a typical hydraulic assembly, and this is an upgraded hydraulic assembly that was required with this customer's clutch kit. Okay, this is your what we call slave cylinder, this is what we call a master cylinder, and this is the reservoir. Very similar to brakes. Okay, the pedal will push on this plunger assembly. Notice how complete this kit is with all the electrical, clutch, neutral safety disconnect switches. Some guys will call it a starter safety switch in there as well. Braided steel hydraulic lines, pre-bled, ready to go. These are so simple to put in. Simply goes into the side of the transmission here so that it can push on that clutch fork, okay? And then you're gonna pump it a few times, it's gonna self-bleed, and you're done. Where a factory hydraulic system may fail due to the fact that that clamp load force is stronger, you may wear out or blow out a set of weak hydraulics. These upgraded hydraulics, which typically are universal across many different clutch brands as well, and they're in stock at DG's, will be a stronger option so that the hydraulic portion can work with the mechanical portion to keep your truck shifting smoothly. In this transmission, we talked about the completeness of some of the kits we buy. This kit is no different. The completeness of these kits are beautiful, guys. This, because it is a dual disc kit, came with the new clutch fork, new pivot assembly, which had some specific instructions for depth there. Obviously a new what they call throat bearing. That's the bearing that needs to ride on those clutch fingers, those spring fingers. Their hydraulics and push on this. Everything is nice and new and installed. The pressure plate, clutch discs, flywheel, and in this case, because it's a dual setup, the separator plate as well, are all gonna come ready to go with new hardware, great instructions. This is not a beginner job. Obviously quite heavy components, dropping transmissions, etc. to do this job. Best left to the professionals at DGs. However, if you are a do-it-yourself, you want to do it yourself, give us a call. We'll get you set up with the right clutch assembly for you so you can get that assembly in yourself. Either way, whether it's us or you, you're back on the road, you're happy, and you're shifting smooth. So I think that's all of us for clutches here at DGs today. Any questions, remember, give us a call. We're located here in Listowel, Ontario, 519-418-2886. The wonderful office staff we have are here to answer any of your questions, and if it's super technical, they might even get you to myself as well. Make sure you're following along with our social media stuff. Instagram, Facebook, Google My Business. All of those things are great ways to get a hold of us. Somebody get back to you as quick as we can. You know, we're moving into spring here. It's mid-May here in Listowel, Ontario. Things are blooming. Trucks are coming out of storage. Lots of good things happening in the shop. All things automotive here at DG's ProTech. Make sure you reach out to us and get yourself set up with all of your automotive needs. So for my team and me, glad to chat to you again. We'll see you next time. Somebody's seen my clutch. It's got my stuff in it.